Oh, that's not a real DAC. You have to spend at least $1,000 before you get a real DAC. Every DAC under $500 sounds the same. DACs don't matter. Any basic DAC will do. Look, whatever your beliefs in DACs are, one thing is for certain, that we've been in a DAC revolution now for over 10 years. I purchased my first DAC probably around 2011, and it was a Dragonfly Red. And that's just a USB dongle DAC. And at that time, it was generally considered to be a massive improvement over stereo out. And really my understanding was that this was more of an engineering feat, and really any old standard DAC would do. So we fast forward several years, and then Topping comes onto the scene, and Topping makes the $100 DAC available for so many people, right? But one of the things that we kind of come to learn about the Topping signature is that they do tend to be a little bit more top-endy, or a little bit more of a reference grade DAC. And so I think Fosi Audio coming onto the scene and introducing the Topping ZD3 has been a huge improvement for several reasons that I want to get into. This DAC and preamp is super unique in this price point because it has HDMI ARC. Several years ago, I was looking for a device that had HDMI ARC in, and I didn't want to integrate some big stereo receiver or some home theater component into my system. And at that time, the Bluesound Node was one of the only devices on the market kind of in that sub $1,000 price range that had that feature. And so it was one of those things where if you really wanted to have this minimal system or this feature set, you were going to have to spend a lot more money. As far as I'm aware, this is one of the very first features in the sub $200 price point that has HDMI ARC in. And so what that means is that for somebody that's trying to build their first hi-fi system, or somebody that's trying to build this really minimal system, you can run your TV into this through HDMI ARC, and then for your streaming situation, you could get like a WIM puck or another device, and then feed the DAC of that into here via USB, coax, or TOS. And then out you could run RCA or XLR. And so that's kind of a cool feature set for sub $200. I think that in those early years of the Topping DACs, kind of what we see those things evolve into really is a collection of our collective consciousness. Right there, like our understanding of DACs in those years was really, the purpose of this DAC is to simply convert this thing from a square wave to a sine wave. And so even my friend, whose father is an electrical engineer at that time, was telling me that a more expensive DAC is not going to make your sound better, right? And I think that my own philosophy has sort of skirted that idea, or curtailed that idea, that there is a massive law of diminishing returns when it comes to DACs, and that there is kind of a sweet spot or a price point that I think you can hit and then still get an incredible sound out of. This leads me to my full review of the Fosi Audio ZD3. And I want to start off by talking about build quality. As I reviewed the other Fosi Audio devices, I think this is similar build quality. It's an incredibly nice finish. The aluminum is very smooth. It's not the thickest aluminum chassis, and it's not the heaviest that I've felt. But yeah, no complaints here. It's very well, nicely finished. The rubber feet on the bottom, I think, are a nice quality. What I'll say about the volume knob is there is a bit of a tactile bump that you can feel as you rotate it. And that's kind of a nice feature, a lot more so than just a standard like smooth knob. So it's nice to have a little bit of feedback. What I want to say about the screen on this guy is I think this is a soft plastic. You know, this could get scratched, but I'm not really too concerned because I'm not going to abuse it. I think in a desktop setup, this screen is going to be perfectly legible and readable, but in my listening room, when you have this plugged into a rack and you're sitting 10 feet across the room, it is hard to read. So I guess, you know, it's a welcome feature to have. The screen will indicate what input you are selected, whether it's USB, coax. It will not display what output you're feeding out. So I think as far as I understand, the audio is going to be playing out of both XLR and RCA simultaneously. There is no switch to toggle between those. So just sort of keep that in mind if there was a type of system or a setup that you wanted like more granular control over the output. I didn't mention this, but it does have a 12-volt trigger in and out. Lastly, it comes with your standard power brick. It's a DC 12-volt brick. I've been using my Topping P50 power supply to power this guy, and that's been a big improvement over the standard wallboard. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the sound quality, and I'll compare this DAC a little bit to my current second generation Topping D50. Oh, and I forgot to mention that on the bottom of the device you have a toggle switch to bypass the preamp stage or keep it engaged. So you can toggle that to be bypass or off, and that allows you to then use the volume knob to control the volume or to have it locked at full volume. My initial impressions when I plugged this in were, this is a bit warmer of a DAC than what I was used to. I wouldn't say that it was so overly warm that I was like blown away by its warmth or anything like that. But that initial impression left me going, well, there definitely is not that top end extension or that kind of slam and impact that I'm getting with my D50. I think that this is a bit more of a laid back DAC. I mean, probably more so of a laid back DAC, not a bit more, but it has a warmer presence, and I don't think it is as high of a resolution. And that's kind of my initial impressions. And so I settled in for, you know, that whole day listening to this DAC, and I've now had this for 2 weeks in my system. I have really come to enjoy this DAC. I think that for this price point, a sub $200 DAC, this is just ridiculous. I could tell you to go out and buy like, you know, a Dragonfly Blue dongle DAC for like $200, and I think that this is probably going to be a better DAC than that. I think that there's potential here to have an upgraded power supply, which is going to further increase the resolution here. And that's kind of my experience. So when I plug this into my Topping, P50 power supply, or when I used my Topping P50 power supply to power this device, I was given a much darker background, and I felt like there was more resolution being extracted. I mean, and in general, like that is been my experience when you power these things with better power supplies. You know, I live in an older building too, so I think that there's definitely a need in my system to help clean up the power a little bit. There is, I think, just such a tonal richness here that lends itself to making everything enjoyable. This isn't really a DAC that I think is going to make any one genre blow your mind, but it is a DAC that's going to make everything sound great. Like, it's a true all-arounder in that regard. Again, like when we compare this to, say, my Topping D50, there are tracks or recordings that my Topping D50 will accelerate at and go beyond what the capabilities of this particular DAC are. But at the same time, you know, there might be a poor recording that I actually enjoyed more out of this DAC. And again, I think that that's because like this DAC is tuned to be a little bit more warmth or to have a little bit more warmth, or to be a little bit more mid-range centric. And so you're not getting these big dynamic swings. In terms of like dynamics, I don't think there again that this DAC is going to be as dynamic. I'm not getting these big swings or these big dips down low, or even like these big kind of you know, like I'm not getting like female vocals sort of entering into like ear bleed territory, which I have definitely had with certain recordings using my Topping D50. You know, when we talk about the sound stage on this device, I don't think that this is as layered. I don't think that there's as much instrument separation as my Topping D50, but it is still there like in strides to the extent that it's enjoyable. I don't find myself truly missing anything, because once you start playing music out of this thing, for me, my experience, I just sort of fell into an enjoyment. I never found myself sitting there going like, well, I really miss this, or I really miss that. It's really only when I switch back to my Topping D50 that I'm then able to see what I'm missing, if that makes any sense. And I think like probably what you're gonna miss with something like this versus like a Topping reference grade DAC like the D series, you know, like the D90 or the D50, is going to be that I think those DACs are ultimately more tuned to be neutral and transparent as possible. And you're not going to get the same level of transparency here on this DAC. But like I keep saying, you just get this incredibly great, enjoyable listening experience, because you're not really going to be able to peer deep into the track. You're not going to get that kind of micro tonal textures that you're going to possibly get with like a reference grade DAC. But then again, what that means is you're also not going to get any harshness on poor recordings. My final conclusions, I think, of this DAC is that for sub $200, I think if you're in this price range and you're looking for a desktop or even a full rack DAC, and you know, you're somebody that has a bit of an aversion or to sharpness or anything like that that would be too shrill, or even if you're somebody that listens to just you have a lot of MP3s perhaps, or you're not always listening to like the best quality FLACs, I think that this is a perfect starter DAC to get you going. And I think having XLR out and both RCA simultaneously allows you to do some really cool stuff. I'm gonna do a review of the Topping D50, which I got the brand new one that came out I think like about a year ago, and I'm going to compare that to the old one. But then in addition to that, I also picked up the Topping D70 Velvet, and I think that the Topping D70 Velvet is a really close in character to this DAC. However, I believe the D70 Velvet has greater resolution than what this is capable of. For sure, the D70 has a darker background, but then it still is presenting itself with a ton of warmth that is lush and really enjoyable. So yeah, I think that for this price point, you get a little bit of sprinkling of warmth, and maybe you are coming from a colder DAC and you're looking to switch it out for a warmer DAC. I think that this might fit the bill. You know, kind of in the end, I would place this DAC in the all-arounder kind of budget category. And I think possibly this is a great option for a first-time DAC or first-time kind of hi-fi. But then again, too, like, you know, I have an older Topping D50, and I've tried to rectify a lot of those issues over the years with kind of its transparency at times, right? Because I always say how there does tend to be a little bit of brittleness there, or a lack of warmth, or sometimes I want a little bit more meat on the bones. And so my starting kind of source being my DAC and my streamer, I think, have been very transparent and neutral. And my philosophy has always been to try to get the source point kind of like perfect, or as close to reference, or whatever your kind of mindset about that is, right? And then from there, what my philosophy has been to slowly kind of integrate color or warmth, or find that kind of flavor on top of that. And that just kind of ensures that you build a reference, and then the amp and the speaker are kind of the secondary means of tweaking your system. At least that's always been my philosophy with my setup as I build it out currently. When we kind of switch back and forth between, say, my Topping D70 Velvet and my D50, I think what we're immediately given when we switch back to, say, the D50 and the D70 Velvet is instantly more resolution. And one of the things that I kind of noticed about this DAC in general, I think, is that there's a bit of chestiness or something going on, I think, in the upper octaves of vocals that seem a little bit congested, if that makes any sense. And so I think when I say resolution, that's really what I mean. There's just a little bit more breadth of vocals that have a little bit more life and extension, like they breathe more with the D70 Velvet and the D50. Like they have more, like they linger. Like when the singer stops, there's another 5 or 6 seconds of decay. Where I think with the ZD3, there's a bit of roll off there that happens much quicker than it does on this D70 and the D50, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, so that's been the Fosi Audio ZD3, guys. If you like this review or you like this sort of take on it, please hit the bell notification down below, and I'd also love to hear what your guys' comments are about this particular DAC. Have you listened to it? Do you think these cheap DACs are stupid? Like, are they just a waste of money and time? Or do you believe that, one needs to spend $1,000 on a DAC? So I'd love to hear your comments down below. And you'd like to watch another review, please watch my last video down below, the Line Magnetic LM34IA. All right, guys. Thanks. This has been Nick from Nick's Listening Space.